Right, so there was this stretch, maybe 2 years or maybe closer to 3, where I genuinely thought that God had stopped talking to me. And I don't mean like you're missing some fuzzy feeling during worship, yeah? I mean proper silence, cold, long, like shouting into a well and hearing nothing back, only your own echo. And the mad thing, it felt like he was still chatting away to everyone else around me. Their prayers getting answered, their doors opening, their lives moving forward, while I'm sat here like some idiot, waiting for a text that never comes. And you know what's worse than God feeling distant? God feeling selective. Like he's got his favourites and you're not one of them. If you've ever felt like God's gone quiet on you, or worse, like he's actually turned away, this one's for you. Not a sermon, not me trying to fix you, just a story. One I reckon you might find yourself in. There's this one line from Genesis chapter 40 that just floors me every time. The chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, he forgot him. Right, so here's the crack. Joseph's in prison, wrongly by the way, and he meets these two lads who've had mental dreams, right? One's the king's baker and the other is his cupbearer, basically the fella who makes sure the pharaoh's wine isn't poisoned. Grand job if you can get it, I suppose, until you get poisoned maybe. Anyway, Joseph interprets these guys' dreams. Baker, not great news mate. Cupbearer, you're golden. You'll be back to work in 3 days. And Joseph says to your man, listen, when you get out of here, mention me to the Pharaoh, will you? I'm innocent. I shouldn't be in here. The cupbearer, well, he gets his freedom in 3 days. He gets his job back, his life restored, and then nothing. He forgot Joseph. 2 full years. Have you ever felt like that? Like you've been faithful, you've shown up, you've even helped other people get their breakthrough, and still it's like nobody's calling your name. Not your friends, not your family, but not even God. And here's what gets me about those 2 years. They're barely mentioned in the Bible. Just a throwaway line between chapters. And Joseph remained in prison. Like it's nothing. But for Joseph, that was, whatever it is, 730 days of waking up and thinking, maybe today. And going to sleep thinking, not today. That's not just waiting. That's hope deferred. And the Bible says hope deferred makes your heart sick. Because I'll tell you, I've had my version of those 2 years. No palace waiting for me, no clear answers. And I remember thinking, if God's supposed to be this good father that everyone talks about, he's got a funny way of showing it. I was still turning up at church, mostly, still praying, sort of, but it felt like I was being built for something I couldn't see, or maybe just forgotten entirely. You know that feeling? When you're half afraid to hope and half afraid not to? And the worst part wasn't even the silence. It was watching everyone else seem to have this clear direction, this sense of purpose, while I'm just holding on. More questions than answers rattling around in me. I remember standing in the kitchen one morning thinking, right, so either you're there and you don't care, or you're not there at all. Either way, I'm out of here. Sound familiar? Silence isn't just the same as absence. And just because you can't hear God doesn't mean he's not working. Sometimes the deepest work happens in the quiet places, the unseen places, when there's no audience, no applause, no one keeping score. Just you and whatever God's trying to build in the darkness. If this is hitting close to home for you, would you mind hitting that like button? It helps more people find content like this. And I reckon there's folk out there who need to know that they're not the only ones sitting in silence. But here's the thing, and this took me years to get my head around. Genesis 41 only makes sense because of Genesis 40. Stay with me on this. Pharaoh has these dreams, right? Proper strange ones. Seven fat cows, 7 good ears of grain, 7 bad ones. His magicians, his wise men, nobody can make head nor tail of it. The king is losing his mind. And suddenly the cupbearer remembers, oh, you know what? There's this Hebrew lad in prison, right, who can interpret dreams. How handy is that? But think of the timing of this. Not when Joseph was desperate for it, not when it might have been convenient, but precisely when Egypt needed it, precisely when Pharaoh needed it, when the world was about to face 7 years of famine and needed someone who understood both abundance and scarcity. That's not coincidence. That's choreography. So they dragged Joseph out 2 years later, mind, and he's ready. Not just ready, but the right kind of ready, because those years in prison, they weren't wasted time. They were the very place his character had been forged. Think about it. The Joseph who went into prison, he was a bit of a show-off, if we're honest. Daddy's favourite, flashing his coat around, telling his brothers they'd bow down to him. 17 years old and full of himself. Not exactly leadership material, was he? But the Joseph who stands out to Pharaoh, different man entirely. Humble, wise, ready to save the nation from famine. Ready to forgive his brothers who sold him. Ready to see God's heart even in betrayal. See, prison didn't break Joseph, it made Joseph. Those 2 forgotten years didn't waste him. They prepared him for a job nobody else could do. Because when you're managing the food supply for the entire known world, when you're making decisions that will determine whether nations live or die, you can't be the lad that gets jealous over a coat. You need to be someone who's learned to trust God when you can't see his plan. Someone who's been broken and then rebuilt from the inside out. What looked like abandonment was actually preparation. What felt like God going quiet was him doing the deep work, the soul stuff that happens where no one's looking. That's always his way. You're not being behind, you're being prepared. But there's what I wish I'd understood during my own dark stretch. God wasn't silent because he didn't care. He was working in ways that I couldn't see, preparing me for things I couldn't imagine, developing muscles in me that I needed in the battles I didn't even know were coming. Those years when it felt like nothing was happening, everything was happening just below the surface, in the quiet places where character gets built and faith gets tested and refined. Now look, I'm not saying this because it makes it easy. Being in the middle of your own chapter 40 is brutal. When God feels distant, when your prayers feel like they're bouncing off the ceiling, when everybody else seems to be getting their breakthrough and you're still stuck. If you've been there, or if you're there right now, can I just say something? You're not broken. You're not weak. And you're in better company than you think. Even Jesus who knew better than any of us what the Father was doing, even he cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me? On the cross, in the dark, feeling that separation. If the Son of God can feel forgotten, then you and I, we're allowed to feel it too. But here's what I wish someone had told me back in those years. Stay in the story, even if all you can manage is turning up at church once a week, half-hearted and full of questions. Keep talking to God, even if all you're saying is, where the hell are you? He can handle your honesty. He prefers it, actually. You're allowed to feel forgotten, but feeling it doesn't make it true. And here's the mad thing about Joseph's story. When Pharaoh finally calls for him, Joseph doesn't even hesitate. No bitterness, no, where were you 2 years ago? He just interprets the dreams, gives Pharaoh the plan, and gets on with saving Egypt. That's what those forgotten years built in him. Not resentment, readiness. See, this isn't just Joseph's story, it's God's way. David spent years running from Saul in caves before he became king. Moses spent 40 years tending sheep in the desert before he led Israel out of Egypt. Paul spent 3 years in Arabia after his Damascus Road experience before he started his ministry. The pattern's always the same. God calls and then he prepares. And the preparation usually looks like abandonment, but it's not abandonment. You're not abandoned. It's development. God's developing something in you that can only be developed in the dark, in the quiet, in the places where nobody's watching and nobody's cheering. Because the assignments he's preparing you for, they require someone who's been tested, someone who's learned to trust when they can't see, someone who's discovered that his faithfulness isn't dependent on your feelings. That's not something you learn in a classroom. That's something you learn in a prison cell, in a cave, in a season where God feels silent but is actually doing his deepest work. And here's where Isaiah slips in, chapter 49, like someone putting a gentle hand on your shoulder. Can a mother forget her nursing child? Can she feel no love for the child she has borne? But even if that were possible, I would not forget you. See, I have engraved you on the palms of my hands. Now in those days, people would carve their names of their loved ones into their hands, permanent, like tattoos, right? Like branding. Not just a note in a diary that might get lost. Engraved, cut deep, scarred in. And God says that's where your name is. Not humanity in general, you, your actual name. The one your mom gave you, the one your friends call you, the one that sometimes feels so ordinary you wonder if it matters at all. It's there, cut into the hands of the Almighty God. You may feel invisible right now, but God couldn't forget you if he tried. Your name is literally part of him now. And there's a beautiful thing about scars. They're permanent. They don't fade with time. They don't wash away. They're written into the very fabric of who you are. That's how deeply you're remembered. That's how permanently you are held, even when, especially when, you can't feel it. Listen, if content like this helps you, real faith for real people dealing with real silence, I'd love your support on Patreon. It's how I keep this channel independent and honest, and means I don't have to kowtow to the algorithm, and it means I can keep making videos for people who need them most. Subscribe if you're tired of surface level faith content that pretends that Christian life is all mountaintops and breakthroughs. We're building a community of people who know God works in the valleys too, in the prison cells, in the forgotten years. Joseph didn't know that chapter 41 was coming. How could he? He hadn't read the Bible. Sitting there in the prison, probably wondering if this was just his life now. But it was coming. If you're in your own chapter 40 right now, if you're in the place where God feels silent and you feel forgotten, don't walk out of the cinema yet. You don't know what's around the corner. The cupbearer is about to remember. Pharaoh is about to dream, and you're about to discover that all these forgotten years, they weren't forgotten at all. You're not forgotten. You're being formed, and your name is still written on his hands. My name is Jacob, and this might be church.